It's me. It's that guy. That guy's here. And my
It's
mic
me.
isn't muted
It's
this
me.
time.
It's
So we're
D.
good.
P.
EP, baby boy. Whoop. And finally, bringing up the real. It's
Hello.
Stefan the Intern with his multicolored Bob Marley shirt.
Yes.
He just got back from Jamaica.
It blurred it out. It must be copyright.
It must be copyrighted. Yeah.
I lean back in the chair, man.
I'm leaning back in the chair. We're fired. Anyways, welcome everybody to another fantastic Thursday. That means we have another
We
great
have
show.
James. Hello,
Time
James.
for the show. What's up, James? James is always here. Faithfully always here, by the way. We love him. We love to see it. So let's get the big news out of the way. America, the United States, had an election for a president. And we're not going to get into it. But suffice it to say, it has caused some turmoil and some division out there with some folks. We will not be discussing it, but I'm sure we could, maybe one or two of us might discuss it on a different platform, on a different thing. But for the most part, we're going to keep it pretty much political free because that's what we do here on the show. We all have our own opinions about these elections and things, and that's perfectly fine. And
Just
we
like
all
our video games.
We all support the right to vote for who you choose to vote for, but don't infringe it upon the rest of us. All right, that's it. That's it.
Anybody who wants to hear an analysis of how it went without a particular endorsement of any of the candidates, I did talk about it on my other podcast, which is the Spider Does Things show. It's episode 2 on Spotify right now, coming to YouTube
And
probably on the weekend.
isn't that copywritten?
Which
Let's
part?
talk about that.
Well, that's a different show. I've got 2 shows over there on Spotify. I've got that, and I've got all of the Let's Talk About things are.
Yeah.
But if you want to hear me talk about the election in a way that I think is respectful, without endorsing anybody and without like going too far on anybody's toes, I talk about it pretty thoroughly there. It's an hour-long show, a couple other things to talk about. So there you go. And like Rob said, we may have a little discussion at some point separately, just to give some thoughts about it without, again, explicitly endorsing anybody, because it's irresponsible for an entertainer such as ourselves to be out here endorsing things and trying to sway your opinion.
Right. If the world did, if our country did less of that. Anyways, we're not going to get into all that nonsensical nonsense. As for myself, I've been just streaming and working. That's all I've been up to. You can catch me over at the Uncanny streaming all kinds of fun games. I was playing some Baldur's Gate 3 today. Much like Skyrim, you just walk down a street, you get into a quest. Next thing you know, you're 7 hours deep doing something you didn't even know you were going to do. And continuing my Final Fantasy-a-thon, I am now in the halfway point of Final Fantasy 3.
Nice.
So you guys can feel free to jump on in. I played Final Fantasy 3 before you even knew there was a Final Fantasy 3.
Yeah, I started my marathon first. That's all. I am on 4 now, though.
I copied 100%.
It's a race now.
But it's funny because, like, my other friend,
if you call it a race, he's gonna make it a race, and then he's gonna be like, "I'm on game number 6" when I'm halfway through 4, and I'm just like,
he's not wrong. I will 100% up that ante. Like,
don't let us revisit our achievement battle. That I turned off all of my public achievement.
He did.
Stuff,
he turned
so
it off
compete with me
because I was like, let's go.
I just turned him off. I was like, no, I'm not gonna do this with you.
That was in the Game Pass era where you could just play walking simulators and get 1,000 gamer score in a matter of like an hour or two. Not too many of those out there now. But yeah, that's when we played Firewatch. God, that's still the most single-handedly most depressing game I think I've ever played. It had no resolution, none.
No,
it was just sadness.
Everybody was broken at the end. Like everybody was just like, "Oh, we're all sad."
Yeah, we're sad. So now you got to be sad. So yeah, a lot of walking simulators back then. That was probably like 3-4 years ago at this point, a long time ago. So I've been doing that. I kind of wanted to stream. Even though I don't stream all the entire gameplay of Final Fantasy, I play a lot of it off stream because some of them just require so much grinding, especially
Yeah.
3 because the job
That's
level.
the only one that I just took time off because I had to. If
Yeah,
I'd
I
have
know.
just done every single stream of the grinding, I would have just had 5 streams, 5 days worth of just grind streams, and I was like, I'm
Easy.
not doing that to the
I'll
people.
tell you this, it gets easier from here on out. It's not as there's no jobs.
Yeah,
This
4
one
is a
you're
lot
playing
simpler.
now, the 4 is the best one. 4 is one of the greatest Final
That's what
Fantasy
I've
of
heard.
all time. So, anyways, Steven, what have you been up to?
Nothing, just working all the time.
That's all our man Steven does.
Yep.
Gentlemen, today we're going to be talking about some mysteries, maybe some ancient ones you guys have, maybe some not so ancient ones. We're going to go ahead and start with our intern though, because he was super stoked to talk about
Yep.
Roanoke. So why don't
Stoked,
you go
dude.
ahead?
Totally
Why don't you go
stoked.
ahead, dude,
All right.
and tell
So
us about Roanoke?
Roanoke was an old colony founded by the governor Ralph Lane in 1585 on Roanoke Island in what would be present-day Dare County in North Carolina. The colony was troubled by a lack of supplies and poor relations with some of the local Native American tribes, such as Croatoan. A resupply mission by Sir Richard Grenville was delayed, so he abandoned the colony and had to return to England in 1586. Long story short, they got delayed by about 3 years, and when they finally got back to Roanoke, they couldn't find anything. The only thing they found was in a tree, they found the word Croatoan, but like all the food was still left out. There where clothing was still there. It looked like everyone had literally just disappeared, and they thought maybe they had gone and been evaporated. Not That's not the right word. Not evaporated. Integrated into some of the local Indian tribes, perhaps, or they thought they might have gotten disease and gotten sick. And so they don't really know what happened. Still to this day, they've never been able to figure out what happened, and the only evidence they have is the word Croatoan carved into a tree.
So let's analyze this as we normally do.
Yep.
What are some of your personal theories on what happened?
So, of course, I'm a big fan of the TV show Supernatural. So they had an episode on there, and long story short, they thought it was just a demon that got rid of everybody. But other than that, personally, I wonder if maybe it's like some people think. I like the theory that they might have like integrated with some of the local colonies, and they just over time bred out to where they were all integrated completely and you couldn't tell what was going on anymore. Like you couldn't tell who was originally Indian and who wasn't.
Okay.
But that would still beg the question, why did they leave, and why did they leave in such a rush? Even if they had integrated with the other tribes, why had they left in such a rush?
So why do you think they left in such a rush?
I would say maybe some sort of battle, but I would think if there was some sort of battle, then they probably would have, gotten attacked and there would have been, some bodies laying around. Unless maybe they had a scout that saw something dangerous coming on the horizon and they didn't have time to avoid it. It could have even been some sort of natural disaster, like a really bad storm on the way.
Okay. Interestingly enough, I think they probably ran out of food. They ran out of food sources, so they went further into the interior to see if they could find food sources.
That was one of
Shouts
the
out to Scruffy
theories.
here. Yeah, I think
They thought
that's
they
what
might
it
have
was.
built their own ship and gone out to sea.
And that's what I personally think it was. I think
Yeah,
either they went back out or they went in.
Yeah.
And just like a lot of people think that they mingled on in with the local natives, and I think they did that
Yeah.
more so. And thank you to Scruffy for the raid. He raided us on the Twitch channel. You guys can head on over there and check the show out. It's always over there. But yeah, I think that what happened was they ran out of foodstuffs and they couldn't survive much anymore. And winters are harsh. Care what anybody says. Winter, especially then. It's not like it is today where in a lot of places like that, winters aren't as harsh. There, I think winters were a lot harsher and they couldn't survive. And some went home, some went inland, and I think that they pretty much stayed with the natives. What are your thoughts on this, Spider?
The prevailing theory, which is what I kind of subscribe to, is basically that they relied on those supplies that never came.
Yeah.
And if you're in a new colony and if you're in a new place, for us, 3 years is not necessarily a very long time because we have access to everything
Yeah.
and not a whole lot happens in 3 years as far as our society goes, technically. But for them, it's a new place, it's a new continent. The weather's more brutal.
Yeah.
They couldn't just go
Everything
to
is
the
just
store.
yeah, they
Yeah.
hadn't had any time to really set up crops yet. They hadn't
Yeah.
gotten used to the way that the soil was to plant things correctly. They really did not yet know what they were doing. And so when they didn't get the supplies, they had to make some real difficult decisions. And I
Yeah.
go along with the theory that they approached the natives that they could find and they were like, "Hey, we're hurting here. We've lost a bunch of people. We've buried them. We've done this. We're not gonna last if we don't do something. Can you help us out?" And one thing I think that gets overlooked is that a lot of Native American tribes weren't sedentary. They didn't stay in one spot. They kind of
Right.
roamed around a little bit. So I think what happened was when they went and said, "Hey, we need help," then the tribe was like, "Sure, but we're not going to stay here. We're going to go around different places. You got to be okay with the travel." And they must have agreed to it because nobody found where they went. And I think that's why we haven't found where they went, because they didn't put down roots anywhere. They
That would
kept
make
going where
sense.
the tribe went. And it may not have even been very far, but remember, this is the wilderness of America before we had any roads, before we had anything cleared away. There was lots of forest. There was, and especially was this is Roanoke's in Virginia, right?
Yes.
So we've been to Virginia and West Virginia, and that region is heavily forested. And at the time, it was even more so than it is now. Like the
Right.
climate was different. It's easy to get lost in the woods, especially if you're just traveling on through or you don't put any permanent structures up. And I think really that's eventually what happened. They left a note to say, "Hey, we went to talk to the Croatoans, and but that was it. Like they couldn't." And maybe they left a more extensive note than that too. But what they had wasn't durable enough, and it degraded. And the only thing left was the word. It might not, they could have written in charcoal or something from their fires and said, "Here, this is where we went," expecting somebody maybe to show up within a week or a month, and nobody did. So nobody found it because it was gone, washed away by the weather, or who knows.
Now, chat, feel free to weigh in on what you guys think. The chat's always open for discussion. I also want to point out, too, that you bring up a good point about them not being sedentary. They move. And this
Mm,
is evidenced by the Great Serpent Mound here in Ohio, in Athens, Ohio. They would come around and clean it up. That's how we were able to figure out that the Great Serpent Mound was a lot older than what they had originally estimated by many of thousands of years.
It's
So
called
we get
nomadic, right?
yes, we they're moving around, and that's evidence with crops that they planted. Uh, Marijuana being one of those crops that were planted. They would just drop the seeds and keep going. James says Bigfoot got them. Bigfoot,
Uh-oh.
get over here! Pulled the scorpion off. But yeah, I think this one I think is more of an easier mystery to solve. Like you said, Spider, they move around a lot, so they probably just went with them. And we often overlook the fact that America at that time was vast wilderness. There wasn't any.
mhm.
You couldn't go to a Giant Eagle or your local supermarket and get food. You had to go out. You had to find animal patterns. You had to hunt. You had to fish. And you just had to know the lay of the land. And they didn't. Our ancestors didn't know the lay of the land. So some of them went back home thinking, you know what? I don't want to be here. I'd rather, take that so many month-long journey to go back to England. And others said, you know what? No, we're going to stay here. Maybe I get seasick, but I'd rather be on solid land than have to make that journey again. And so they found the Indians, and they said, hey, we want to go with you guys. Well, if you go with us, we're not going to be chilling. We're going to move around a lot. We're going to go here. We're going to go there. Are you cool with that? And they said, yeah, we're cool with that. And I think they ventured off with those Native Americans. And that's why we haven't found any trace of them.
Mm.
And I'm sure some died along the way. you would have to go to that wilderness. I think what you would have to do is map where those Native Americans went and then go from there. So you'd have to map the way they went. And sometimes that might be a little bit harder than it is, you know. But that's a very good mystery, albeit one I think easy to solve if we could map out of those Native American. I think we could figure out relatively what happened to them. So very interesting, Stephen.
I would like to point out that James said there's also the missing British regiment in Turkey in World War II and the Chinese battalion of World War II.
There has been a couple different missing regiments in different wars that just up and disappeared. Just they've never found them. They never found their weapons. They never found their uniforms. I mean, we can even go back to the
Civil War,
the event in you can go to Civil War. There's a couple there, but I also want to point out the event in Russia where everybody just left their tents and took off running. Now that mirrors very much the missing 411. For those of you that don't know about that, the missing 411 is
sounds like
the national parks. The national parks where people go missing, but it's very strange how they go missing. For instance, one gentleman was seen leaving his boots, his hunting rifle, his backpack at the fire and traipsing off into the wilderness. For what reason? You know, a lot of people that go hunting in those areas, they know the land. They know that, you're going to follow water. You want to follow water to get back to civilization, but they didn't do that. And there's a whole reason for that, whether that be abduction cases, whether that be a Bigfoot, whether that be a Yeti, whether that be, some form of cryptid. Nobody knows, but usually it's just the tracks and they come up missing. So, and James says one whole Chinese army years way back, and I think too, a lot of times that could just be they fell into a giant sinkhole. I know that sounds a little bit crazy, but a lot of those times, maybe they went into a cave, got lost in the cave systems. It's hard to tell with a lot of the missing ones because they don't find their stuff. They often don't find anything, so it's just something to chew on. Spider, what do you have for us? What mystery have you been looking to solve?
I'm going to revisit something that we've talked about on the show before. And the reason I want to revisit it is because I found out something that I had not known before that I don't think we covered. Supposedly, some people say that this mystery has been solved. This is about the man from Torred.
Was that the time traveler, or was that the guy with the pic? Okay.
Yeah, supposedly.
I thought it was either that or the picture with the guy that's standing behind the kid that looks like he's from another planet.
That's the painting, but this is the man from Torred. I'm gonna give a brief background on it, and we've talked about it before. Like I said, we had a pretty extensive show on time travel and dimensions and things like. So we've probably mentioned it multiple times.
Yeah, because we mentioned John Peter as well.
Yeah.
Was this the guy that was at the airport?
Yes.
Okay.
He showed up in Japan. And
Steven, it's really just Steven. Steven from the future.
He showed up in Japan and he'd come from, he had a Korean wife in the actual official telling of the story, right, which is where some of the facts are that supposedly solve the mystery. He had shown up in an airport and he was trying to connect a flight. And he was trying to contact a business in Japan that he was supposed to have a business meeting with. He had a passport that was marked with various places that he had been, various countries he has passed through. All of them were real countries. He had a visa. He said that he had been born in the U.S. and moved through several European countries, and that he was from, when they asked him, okay, well, where are you from, so that we can connect you with where you're going, so we know your full path. He said he was from a small country called Torred, between Spain and where was it?
Portugal?
something like that. It was like there's an actual country there called Andorra. There's a small country that
Right.
probably nobody's ever heard of called Andorra that actually is
Right.
there. And when he said Torred, they said, "Oh well, there's no such country." And he said, "Well, yes, there is. I can show you." And they pulled out the map, and it found that there was a different country there. And he got really agitated, and he claimed that for sure that he was from there. They did some checking, and they found that none of the places that had stamped his visa and his passport checked out. They were all real countries, but none, and all the seals looked official. Everything looked like it was real things, but none of those governments could verify that he had ever passed through their country or had been at any of their various airports or border checkpoints. And so they locked him up. They said, "Okay, we're going to hold you until we figure this out." The mystery says that they shut him in a room for a while under guard, and when they went back, he was gone. All of his things were gone, everything he had with him was gone, and he just disappeared completely. The story there doesn't mention his wife beyond the fact that he showed up with his wife. There were a lot of theories at the time that we've covered on here about the fictional country of Torred, because he seemed to know all about it. He had a list of his customs. He talked about the government. He talked about all kinds of things that all made sense, except that it didn't exist. So people wondered, is he crazy? Is he what's wrong with him? The theory among a lot of people was that he was from a different dimension, where a different country had sprung up there. The company
Parallel
that he was
universe.
the company that he was supposed to meet with in Japan didn't exist. He tried to cash, he showed them a bank account that he had from somewhere from his home country. The bank didn't exist, even though all of the bank documents he had, all of the checks were as real as you could imagine they would be. And at the time, it was a mystery because they say it disappeared. Now, the facts that I didn't know about, there are some facts related to this that people have kind of put together. And apparently, uh, the belief is that he was a man named John Allen Kuchar Zegras. They have long names in Europe sometimes. And he was detained in 1960 in Japan for alleged document fabrication.
Ah.
He was dubbed a mystery man by Japanese news at the time, which is possibly or blah 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 possibly blah 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 blah, blah possibly where the story started blooming out, because oh, he's a mystery man. Oh, I wonder where he's from. He was arrested by Tokyo police, suspected of identity fraud. He tried to cash a 200,000 yen check and a $140, around 50,000 yen at the time, traveler's check at the Japanese office of Chase Manhattan Bank in 1959, and 100,000 yen at the Japanese office of the Bank of Korea. And the case was investigated by the Tokyo Public Security Bureau. And the guy who did the investigation wrote about this man in his memoirs. Now, if I could track down a copy of that, I think that'd be great. I don't know how difficult that would be. It's a Japanese natural born citizen. It's probably written in Japanese. I don't know if there's a translation. If I can get a hold of one, I'll probably pass it to somebody who reads a little bit of Japanese who can translate some things for me. But his passport contained the stamps of Japanese embassies in different East Asian countries, but the passport was determined to be counterfeit. Moreover, a visa was issued by the Japanese embassy in Taipei, which is now a different association, apparently. They sentenced him to 1 year in prison. He tried to end himself in prison with a piece of glass he had secretly, well, actually, during the court, he had brought with him a piece of glass he had brought to the court. He failed. After his release, so he served his year, he was deported from Japan to Hong Kong, and he is recorded to have re-entered that country, and his wife was deported to South Korea, and that's where the facts of the story end. So it's interesting how we go from that to him being shut in a room and then mysteriously disappearing. It doesn't talk about why he was so strenuous about this other country, or whether he made it up as a joke. It doesn't say if they got him to confess that it was a joke, because maybe it wasn't, maybe it was.
Maybe it was part of the counterfeiting.
It could be. It doesn't say. Also, I've looked at a few different places to try to find some more direct evidence on this, and there's not a lot of direct sources online at the moment that talk about documentation proving the stuff was fake. So there's still some mystery involved.
It's a gray area.
Did he make all of this up, and did he pass through all of these different places with that same story and they just believed it before he got to Japan? Or did he slip into Japan from Hong Kong and that was the start of it, the start and the end? Had he never really been anyplace else? Supposedly he was able to speak up to 7 different languages, several European languages plus Japanese and things like that. So it's
paid for that Duo Premium.
As much as there's some factual information supposedly solving the case from it, I think there's still a mystery there. And I think the mystery is, was he really a fraud, or did he really believe the things that he told them in Japan?
This is an interesting case because I don't know that much about it as much as you did, or do, I should say. And to me, it just sounds like he was an excellent forger, but he was a bad forger on the same token. Like he was able
to think they would read that close.
He was able to put it up to stand up to most things, most scrutiny, but then you get somebody with a trained eye or the story doesn't mesh. My thing is he probably has some form of mental, I don't want to say disability, but he probably has some form of mental issue to where he just wants to trick people. And that is his end, because he doesn't have an end game here. There's no end game for this.
It's a real elaborate story for just trying to get one place to another, which is really where the mystery is. Like, why go through all the trouble unless it's all about the excitement and whatever? But you'd think after the fact he might come out and say, well, I got away with it until they got me. But there's no real statement of that, which makes it kind of the whole thing I find really interesting because of that. Even if he was just a fraudster, the whole reason of why he went to all the trouble of doing that.
And how did
what about his wife?
Yeah, what about his wife? She never came out and said anything.
And she got deported to a different country. So did they
reunite? Yeah, did they reunite somehow? Did he get back into South Korea? Because if he had that kind of ability, you would think he'd be able to go just country jump. Because you like to do this kind of stuff, you got to have the right tools, you got to have the right processings. You got to have a PC to do half of this stuff. So like, and they never found any of that.
Yeah. They didn't say that they found any of that equipment. They just had the documents and they assumed, I think a lot of it was the assumption that they were false.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
I don't know if it was, I think they couldn't prove that they were real because of, for whatever reason, and they didn't have the records of it. So the assumption was, well, these are false and these are counterfeit.
What year was this?
1959.
Well, yeah, that would make sense because they would have to have called. You would, and it would have been easier to do it back then because you don't have the internet. There's no internet, so it's not like you can't just run a quick check. Like let me call the this and this. Let me run this. So yeah, it would have been easy in 1959. In 1959, you could have gotten away with that. But that's another thing. Like, what was in it for him unless it was cheap laughs? And the fact that he wanted to kill himself for just a year in prison seems very odd as well, because why would you want to do that? Like, what would be the point of that? Especially in Japan, like it's a
back
year.
To your own time period.
maybe, but maybe he just had some form of psychosis.
Could
maybe
be.
somewhere upstairs. I don't know. This one is just a very odd tale to me.
You throw in the facts and it just adds more to the mystery.
It gets weirder.
It takes it away from the supernatural part of it, like the multiple universes, but then it adds into, well, what was the point? And then you really have to wonder, because it's a pretty good story if you just made it up.
Yeah. And if he was able to produce the bank documents, at some point, like the intern said, he had to be a savant to be able to create bank records, to be able
Yeah.
to create a whole fictional place,
Even
to
just to keep
say,
your story straight
yeah,
takes a lot of remembering and making sure you've rehearsed the whole thing and all that other kind of thing. To have all of that stored in your brain, you got to be a relatively
I can't even
intelligent
remember how to
person.
do my job on a daily basis.
it seemed like maybe he suffered from some autism, maybe as well,
Could be.
because
Could be.
that's usually like a deciding factor. I think also too, if we really look at it, uh, there was nobody else that came out that knew him personally. Nobody ever came out and say, I know who that guy is.
At
So,
least not online that I could find.
so what if that wasn't even his real name? That's another thing you got to factor.
What if he was just a loser?
The book, by the way, in Japanese, released in 2016 by the officer who did the investigation, is called "Spies Who Passed Me."
Mm.
Bunji Shunju. I don't know if I said that right at all. Bunji Shunju by Atsuyuki Sasa. Atsuyuki Sasa.
Akayuki Sassy.
So if you and most of
the
the other references are either in Japanese or they're stories about the man from Torred that came afterwards. So if we can get a hold of that book, again, it says it's in Japanese. I don't know if it's ever translated anyplace else. Came out in 2016. Spies Who Passed Me. If we can find that, maybe we'll be able to see a direct account from somebody involved.
And that's tough because I just tried to look it up, and it gave me Austin Powers, the spy who something else.
Yeah, because that's the internet. So you're gonna dig through a lot to get. Because I can't imagine that this is a very well-read book by the world. It's a Japanese investigator's memoir was written in Japan for other people in Japan, I'm sure. It's probably not written for people
I want to learn
across the
how
rest
to
of the
read
world.
Japanese books.
So I can't imagine it's got a large
No,
area of publication.
not as large as Austin Powers, though.
Well,
That's pretty large. Yeah, that's interesting. So I am going to talk about one of my favorite topics that I didn't even have to research because I know so much about it. And that's Iram of the Pillars. Yeah, y'all know what I'm about. Y'all know it.
I'm just gonna tune out and get drunk while it's doing
Just it'd be like that time I did the geometry episode. No, Iram of the Pillars, in Arabic, meaning the Iram dot al Imad, is Iram of the tent poles, also called Iram, Aram, or the city of the pillars, is the lost city that's mentioned in the Quran in Surah Al Fajr 6 through 14. Now, Iram of the Pillars is located in the Empty Quarter, which is a desert that sits in three countries: Saudi Arabia, Yemen, and Oman. Smack dab in the middle of them. It's a very vast desert. And it once was a big city. And in the Quran, it talks about how Allah dealt with Ad or Shaddad bin Ad, who was the ruler of this vast kingdom that was basically in the desert at the time. And much like the tale of Sodom and Gomorrah, where they go in and they say, hey, if you find two people who are good people, we'll save the city. You find one person who's good, we'll save this. They didn't find anybody. So the city got absolutely destroyed. They moved the good people out. Well, same basic concept. He comes in, the prophet Hud comes in and says, hey, you guys got to turn from your wicked ways. You're worshiping idols, this, that, and the third. They're like, we're not doing that. We're not going to do that. So he opens up a sinkhole basically and sinks the entire city. Well, we have some new light to shine upon this amazing mystery that I have found. So the people of Iran were the Ad, ruled by Shaddad bin Ad, who supposedly used the Great Pyramid as a treasure storehouse. He was one of the earliest large civilization rulers. So he ruled for quite some time, but once the city was swallowed, he went with it. And they talk about the people of Odd being giants, being very tall folks. Now, something I didn't mention before was that there's a direct connection to the Nabateans. Now, for those of you who don't know who the Nabateans are, that is Petra. So, if you've ever seen Petra, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade took place in the end part of that movie is in Petra, the big old entryway in the desert. They have their own water irrigation in the desert as well.
A quick note for anybody who's into modern archaeology, not to derail your whole thing, but they recently found a new tomb underneath Petra with a whole bunch of goodies in it. So it's brand new,
yeah.
like just within the last few months. So really exciting stuff. So,
and so they are related. They are both from the same area in Saudi Arabia, and they both went there different ways. They were all part of the same tribe that dwelled in Saudi Arabia. That's where they were all from, is in the middle, about the middle of Saudi Arabia. And they all went different ways. The Nabateans go up north to Jordan. Meanwhile, the Odd go south into the empty quarter. Why they went to the desert, if it was a desert at that time, which there's some evidence coming out that maybe it wasn't such a desert at that time, much like the Sahara wasn't always a desert. And so the connection here now we have to the Nabateans. Nabateans were a mystery people too that just up and vanished, just gone. Not a lot of records from them. Rome, I think, pretty much pushed them out. I think Rome pretty much got rid of them, and that was that. But the Odd were a completely different tribe. They just straight disappeared, fell right into a sinkhole. Now, my theory that I have had on this, and if I can go to the empty quarter one day, which I plan on it, now that I have a passport, I will try to venture out there at some point, because I think that what happened to that city was more of a natural disaster in a way. That something was controlled, maybe there was some form of controlled explosives that they had used to sink the city. I don't know. It's hard to get out that way. It's hard to get into the Middle East and do archaeological excavations because they're so very tight with places like that. I mean, given the current state of the world, for a long time, those kind of things were getting destroyed, getting stolen from, getting robbed. It was very much a hard task to get into those countries being war torn. But Saudi Arabia, isn't really war torn, but you got to be careful because you're going into 3 different countries. My theory on this whole situation is I think the shifting sands or whatever they had built it on, had gone on for so long that I think at some point the city collapsed. But there was riches there. Supposedly the city was made out of gold with emeralds and rubies everywhere and was swallowed by the desert. And the fact that Shaddad bin Ad was a ruler of a giant kingdom. It wasn't just Iran that he was a ruler of. He was the ruler of the old Arabic ways. You see, we got to remember the Arab people were basically like very nomadic, and then they end up settling in one spot. That's why you have a lot of the Nabateans who go one way, and then you have the Odd that go another way, and you still have different tribes that move around, but they all end up staying at a place. And so they end up getting wiped out completely. There's no tribe of Odd that exists in this day and age. And there's thoughts that they were giants, and this ties into a lot of my giant research as well. But there was thoughts that there was giants involved and everything else. So that's something that I think people really need to understand here when dealing with this. Is you have to put yourself in that situation and kind of go for that. So that's just me, like I said. What do you gentlemen think?
I agree with you. I think it probably got eaten up by the desert. And it actually reminds me of Uncharted 2 when you were describing it as like a city of gold with emeralds and stuff.
It's
Because in
Uncharted 3.
Uncharted 3,
It's actually in Uncharted 3.
Oh,
That's
it's so it
that's
actually
that's
is.
yes, in Uncharted 3,
Okay.
you actually go to Iram
Yeah.
of the pillars in the end. Yes.
And like when you said it collapsed, that actually made a lot of sense because I was like, how do you build something on sand anyways? Like sand is such a fragile material to even
Right.
build something on in
Not
the
if it's
first place.
heated. If it's heated, it basically turns to glass.
Glass? Okay, yeah.
And you can build on glass. I mean,
Yeah.
they have structures, but for the most part, I think that there wasn't sand. I think at one point it was an actual, basically an oasis, right? And they were
Yeah.
able to build on that oasis, but then at some point, maybe the oasis shifted. Maybe at some point the pole shifted, causing calamity. Because like I said, at one point, Antarctica actually was a lush kind of paradise. The
Yeah, the pole
Sahara wasn't a
shifted.
desert. Once the pole shifted, things shifted. So I think it's the basic same concept, but maybe just with a little bit different because the Middle East is a very strange area. It's somewhere that many countries are fighting for some reason, not just for oil, as people like to say. I think there's something else going on there. There's a lot of historical points of who we were as people that reside in that area. There's also a lot of treasures that have been found. There's a lot of documentation that's been found that's been removed. It hasn't been told to us. Something sits under the Temple Mound, which has been a source of some heated discussions. The Crusades happened in Israel. There's a lot of things that go on in the Middle East that don't go on in the rest of the world. We don't have that we know of, mind you. We don't have people going to South America looking for, like James says, ancient technology. I've never heard us having wars in, Incan, Mayan, Olmec territory. It's always the Middle East. There's something there that we're still looking for today, and nobody seemed to find it. Very much like the Ark that Graham Hancock talked about, in Ethiopia. Talked about that. They've talked about, the different, the Shroud of Turin, the Holy Grail, all of these places, all of these things that they've been looking for centuries sit there, and I think that's the reason why everybody's over there. I don't think it's because of oil. If it was because of oil, you can get that damn near. You can get that in Venezuela when the country collapsed. You could just went in there and basically taken it. You wouldn't have had to do anything. You could just taken it. But like I said, I think in the Middle East, it's a whole different ball game. There's things there. There's a magic, I think, there because they have a lot of different supernatural aspects that we don't have here that we
Jinn?
will never have. Yes. Jinn, Ifrit, all of these things that exist there, that don't exist here, that don't exist in Europe. Because Europe has its own thing, South America has its own thing, but the Middle East seems just to have this resonance of energy that we don't see in a lot of places. And that's me. I need to go over there and y'all can fund that. You have a Patreon if y'all want to fund it. And I need to investigate. That's really what it all amounts to, is just getting a team together and going over there and finding what I think to be accurate. Gentlemen, I will pit this to you. What are your thoughts on Iran? Is it real? Is it fake? What do you think happened to it? We'll start with Spider here.
I think there's a very good chance that there's not just that, but several major metropolis kind of sized ancient cities that have been lost in areas like that because the climate in that region of the world has changed dramatically
Yes.
over the many, many centuries. And not knowing the exact time frame of when some of these things happened, we can look at geology and we can look at different things and we can make a lot of educated guesses, but we don't know for sure when the climate collapsed and when the desert just took over. But when it did, sand is notorious for reshaping things.
Yes.
And if it was something that had rainwater for a long time beforehand, you have rain and water that's reshaping the edifice and reshaping the various stonework. You have the sand on top, just the grittiness just rubbing away everything over there. That even if you take out any chance that there might have been some kind of either supernatural or divine explanation, the climate changing over a certain amount of time is definitely going to have an impact. And if they're far enough away from other places where it starts to cut off supply lines and starts to cut off access to things that they need, such as fresh water or
Right.
whatever, people are going to leave. People
I
are going to
think
leave.
I think too, it could have been, we don't know what material they used to build this city. We look at the one thing that I think that we do negatively, I mean, as a whole, as a society, I don't mean just like me, you, or Steven here. I think one thing we do negatively is we try to correlate our life, our science, our technology with how it was. And I don't think you should do that, because if there was a pole shift,
The
things would be
pyramids.
differently. Things would act differently. Things would resonate differently. There would be the capable aspect of a pyramid to be an electric generator, to generate that electricity. But we tend to look at things in a very um, much like I would say, like when we die, we don't go anywhere, we just die, right? We look at history in the same fashion. We tend to take the historical things that we know from, like, say, the past 100, 200 years, right? Because
But we're always disproving ourselves.
we have pretty good evidence of what has happened in the past 200 years. Let's go 200 years, right? We know there's written there's written text, there's everything else. When we go back, we go to ancient history. When, you're talking about a time when Babylonian kings ruled from 10,000 to 100,000 years, and we try to say, well, that in our times, that's impossible. That doesn't make any sense, because we don't take the lens away. We keep that lens of trying to associate our time, our building blocks with theirs. And you can't do that. I think you have to look at it differently, because things were different back then. And if the poles did indeed shift to cause some sort of calamity to happen,
It could
which
have changed the fabric of
I
existence.
believe has happened. I believe civilizations have risen and fallen long before what we would call recorded history. I think if we could dig underneath that ice shelf in Antarctica, we would find exactly what we were looking for. If the Library at Alexandria hadn't been destroyed, we would be able to find exactly what we were looking for. Now, I'll pose the question to you, Stephen. What are your thoughts on this? What do you think happened to it? This, that, and the third?
I think that it was a real place, and like Spider mentioned, with the atmosphere being different and the increased oxygen back then, we can prove that creatures were larger back then with the increased oxygen, for example. And with everything else going on, like you said, the polar shift changing the world, like I kind of blurted out a second ago, that can change the very fabric of existence as far as we know. And how you said that we shouldn't, look back at history with a certain lens on it, like, when they built the pyramids. That is so impressive to us because we compare it to our technology, and we don't understand what kind of technology they may have had at that time.
Right. I think that's important, because things react differently. Why is the Great Pyramids, why do they have things that conduct electricity? Why was the capstone gold? Gold is a high conductor of electricity and a
And
very precious
dragons.
metal. And dragons, apparently. But you had things like granite. Underneath the granite was water, all conductors of electricity. So, and if we would take some of the knowledge that we do have, right? Magnets, how do they work? If you
Magic.
put two magnets, right, not touching, it creates a field in between those two magnets. Come on now. Edward Leedskalnin, Coral Castle. These sort of things are exactly what we need to be researching and putting through the test. But I think we live in a world where they give you very basic science answers for a reason. Very basic science answers for a reason. Like, yeah, we found this, and this is this, and there's nothing supernatural about it. But then you read accounts of people that lived back then, and they like to point out, well, they aren't as smart as they were today, or they didn't go through the same things we go through today. But they understood a lot of the similar things that we do today. Sure, there were things like, they wanted to get the demons out, so they put honey on the forehead or they put a warm cloth on the forehead. But maybe that worked in a certain way. We have a lot of poultices that were made by Appalachian settlers that actually were medically useful. They did research on it and they found that some of those poultices actually worked. So I think same basic concept, but we have to dig deep. But I think digging deep requires us to sort of go to places we probably shouldn't and look into things that we probably shouldn't. Like that's the only way to really understand a lot of these things. That's just my personal opinion about all of it, and dealing with especially ancient mysteries. A lot of your mysteries like Oak Island, and they keep digging in that place hoping to find treasure.
I
At this,
think I've actually got the answer
good.
for that one.
What do you think, Oak Island? What do you think it? What? Tell us.
Okay, so everyone is probably aware. They think it was a treasure spot for Billy the Kid or Captain Kidd, and the money pit and all that. But here's what what I found out earlier today. And I actually found a post on Reddit about it. So, of course, Reddit has all the answers, right? Always.
Right. Always.
So this person goes by the username of Interested21, and this was posted 7 years ago. It's a tar kiln theory. I haven't noticed Joy Steele's tar kiln explanation for the findings in Smith's Cove and the Money Pit, but in my opinion, this is a very good theory. Her book also has the best photo I've ever seen of the Stone Triangle. A founding member of the Friends of Oak Island Society, to be certain she will never be invited on the show, she makes way too much sense. She has actual photos of tar kilns on the island. She also showed that the old forts nearby had sunk nearly 60 meters into the ground, suggesting that much of what is buried in Smith's Cove wasn't buried by nature, not humans. This was caused by both natural erosion and very strong earthquakes in the area pre-1790s. This theory explains the charcoal in the money pit. In fact, she argues that the shape of the charcoal supports her pine kiln theory. Also, some depressions on the island resemble naval stores. Tar kilns, drains, e.g., finger drains found in Smith's Cove, Money Pit, and the Cave-In Pit. According to her, the kiln operations created the beach and the U-shaped structure that was previously dry land. Much of the timber found by Blankenship was heavily soaked in pine tar. There are plenty of pine trees on Oak Island, which never had many oaks, to be honest. Kilns create a lot of ash and charcoal, which also has been found in the Money Pit. She also explains soil liquefaction, which occurs in the Money Pit at 100 feet, which is about where they said the treasure is. She also has published papers that suggest that the 3 chests allegedly found on Oak Island contain treasure and family papers that were bequeathed to Leonora Christina Ulfeldt, daughter of King Christian IV of Denmark, who was locked away in Copenhagen for 22 years. So
we just throwing stuff down a hole.
Yeah, basically. And they were using it, and they said that at the time there was something, I don't really understand exactly how it worked, but something about the tar was very valuable. So people would often process the tar kilns like that. And they said it was a common thing at the time.
See, Oak Island's a weird thing to me. Much like Skinwalker Ranch, I think it's been overblown to a point where it's like,
Yeah.
At this point, I don't really have the big interest in it because everybody's been to Oak Island at this point. They made a whole History Channel series.
Yeah, it's all about that. And
I think,
oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I think once you make a series on something and you're taking into like season 4 and it shows like the 2 guys like Jim and Bill get into it about Oak Island. Jim almost pushes Bill into the hole in Oak Island. Next up, it's much like
that episode.
It's much like Ancient Aliens, right? We're on like season 29,000 of Ancient Aliens. How many things can you say are aliens, right? Everything you could say is alien, but how many times can you regurgitate that same statement? And I think Oak Island is another one. I think Skinwalker Ranch. I think once you media centric that topic, it just becomes overblown. And I think anything that they would have found at Oak Island has either long been removed from the site or doesn't exist. It just doesn't exist. They're just doing it for
what
ratings.
James said. It's all drama.
I think somebody who's looking at it from an environmental perspective is probably on the right track. Because again, like most lost things that are buried or put in an environment that isn't explicitly designed to preserve something, things are going to shift, things are going to move around. An island is still mostly connected farther down. It's its own little landmass, but an island doesn't necessarily just float on their own, disconnected from things. Otherwise, they'd float away. And so that's going to be subject to tectonics and various other things as the Earth moves around. There's going to be rising and lowering water levels depending on seasons. And one of the things they've always said is they have trouble getting into the pit because even if they try to drain things out, water keeps flowing in from these tubes from offshore. And they can't go out offshore because the water's dangerous. They can't look for the plugs. But the thing is, even if you find them, more could open up at any point because of the environment and because of the way that soil moves and plates move. Once those things start happening, they could widen, they could turn into giant cracks. There's no way once that process starts to just keep it just contained. Oh yeah, we made these tubes and that's it. And yeah, I think whatever's there at this point is long ruined.
Yeah.
Or it's going to be just so difficult to get to that there's really no point to it.
And that will take us to the end of our show tonight. I want to thank my co-hosts, Spider and the intern, Steven, for joining us for another amazing round of discussions. Gentlemen, I think we'll continue this same topic next week. I want to talk. I didn't get to talk about it today.
I was thinking that too.
I want to talk about Noah's Ark because Spider here sent me an interesting article regarding Noah's Ark, and I want to kind of get into that. I also kind of want to get into the Jack the Ripper idea of that mystery as well. So I think we'll do mysteries again next week. We're going to continue on.
James.
Thank you, James. Thank you, Scruffy, for the raid. Thank you, Gnarly. Thank you, Mammoth. And I think that's about it. Let me make sure. Thank you, Eyed Cabbage. Thank all my Twitch followers for coming through and hanging out. Appreciate you guys tonight. We'll definitely be back for another episode next week. Also, interesting enough, if you are in the Ohio area, I will be doing a presentation on Tuesday, November 19th. I'll let you know the location. But I'll be doing a presentation. I'm very excited to do this. It's been a while since I've done a presentation, so it will be on secret societies.
Nice.
So if you guys can make it out, awesome. If not, that's understandable. Maybe we can get, maybe Spider can go with me. Who knows? Have to see where he's at.
It just join the Freemasons.
It would just be, it'd be a little trip to Youngstown. And yeah, so be headed out that way.
That's not far.
So yeah, we're that's on the 19th of November. So I'll let you guys know the location as we get closer. Just figure I'd put that out there. Gentlemen, what do you have coming up?
All right.
Intern.
Well, on Saturday, I will be doing another internet weirdness type video, and I haven't had time to look into it yet, but I have discovered the topic. It is something called the Sudbrink Calls. So that sounds pretty interesting.
Check it out. Spider, what do you have coming up for the fine people out there?
I'll be continuing my playthrough through the Final Fantasy franchise on Twitch and then
He stole that
to
from
YouTube.
me. He stole that from me.
I started it.
I started it.
I just started 4, so I'm not far enough in that the whole lot of stuff is going on. But we'll be getting into that, and occasionally, you never know what else will come up. I know I took a couple of breaks during election season and Halloween season for different games for different reasons. I also have more podcast episodes coming up. I don't have any definitive
Yeah.
dates on that. It's kind of whenever I sit down and I have time. And beyond that, just keep following the channels. Follow here and follow on Spider Does Things here on YouTube.
And also, I started the Final Fantasy Marathon first. That was my idea. I just told
100%
him. I told him that it was a good idea, and he ran with it. So I started it. Just so you guys know, it was me. All me. It's always been me. I've given him every idea he's ever had in his life. Even before I knew
Not
him,
even
I would
close.
transmit. I transmitted the ideas into his head. His name, Spider. Guess who gave it to him? I did. Common misconception. No, follow us on our respective channels. You can follow me at the Uncanny Alchemist, actually, over on Twitch. I will be continuing my playthrough of the Final Fantasy games that I started way before Spider ever knew what a Final Fantasy was. But you guys can catch me over at Uncanny Alchemist doing my thing. You can catch all of our content at our different locations, but you can catch this show on This Uncanny Earth on YouTube. So go check that out. Please subscribe. Please share the videos with your friends and family. Talk about it with your friends and family. Hang out. We appreciate everybody that came into the chat tonight. Thank you, Scruffy, for the raid. We appreciate all of you. Gnarly, have a good night yourself. Mammoth, have a good night yourself. Mammoth is actually Jam Sheffield from Metallic. So you guys definitely want to check him out. Send him $2,000 for his guitar. And that is that, gentlemen. So yes, thank you. Deadpool, plug your channel. What is your Twitch channel?
Deadpool Head 888.
We're still waiting for him to beat up on Black Myth Wukong, so we're gonna keep our fingers crossed for that. Anyways, everyone out there, thank you for listening. We'll be back next week with another amazing episode of This Uncanny Earth. We're gonna be talking about Mysteries Part 2. You're not gonna want to miss it. And as always, why be boring when you can be uncanny? We will see you amazing folks next week. Peace.